For decades, Linux desktops were treated like an experiment, a curiosity, or a tool strictly for developers and hardcore enthusiasts. The idea that Linux could ever threaten Windows or macOS on the desktop sounded almost laughable to many people. Linux was powerful, yes, but rough around the edges, fragmented, and often intimidating. Fast forward to today, and that old narrative is falling apart faster than anyone expected. Linux desktops are no longer just good enough. They are becoming genuinely excellent, polished, modern, and in many cases more pleasant to use than the operating systems that have dominated personal computing for years. This shift isn't subtle anymore. It's loud, visible, and impossible to ignore. Windows and macOS may not openly admit it, but if trends continue the way they are, they should be genuinely concerned. What's happening right now is not the result of one single Linux distribution or one magical desktop environment. It's the combined effect of years of slow but steady progress finally reaching a tipping point. Desktop environments like GNOME, KDE Plasma, Cinnamon, Cosmic, and others have matured to a level that rivals and sometimes exceeds the user experience offered by Windows 11 or the latest version of macOS. Animations are smooth, layouts are coherent, workflows are customizable without being confusing, and the overall feel is modern rather than dated. For the first time, Linux desktops don't feel like they are chasing Windows or macOS. They feel like they are confidently walking their own path. One of the biggest reasons Linux desktops are becoming so good is that the people building them actually use them. This might sound obvious, but it makes a massive difference. Many Linux developers daily drive their own creations. When something is annoying, inefficient, or broken, they feel that pain personally. Compare that to Windows or macOS, where decisions are often driven by corporate priorities, marketing goals, or data collection strategies rather than pure usability. On Linux, improvements are frequently driven by real-world usage and community feedback, not by what looks good in a presentation slide. The visual polish of modern Linux desktops has improved dramatically. KDE Plasma, for example, is often described as one of the most beautiful desktop environments available on any operating system. Its transparency effects, blur, animations, and attention to detail rival macOS while offering far more customization. GNOME, on the other hand, has carved out a minimalist, distraction-free experience that feels intentional and refined. It doesn't try to copy Windows or macOS directly. Instead, it presents a clean workflow focused on keyboard navigation, workspaces, and simplicity. The result is an environment that feels modern and professional rather than experimental. Customization is another area where Linux desktops absolutely dominate. On Windows, customization has become increasingly restricted. Taskbar placement, system theming, and UI behavior are often locked down or require hacks and third-party tools. macOS, while elegant, is even more restrictive by design. Linux, in contrast, treats customization as a core feature, not an afterthought. Users can change almost everything, from window behavior and animations to system sounds, panel layouts, and workflow logic. This isn't just about aesthetics. It's about adapting the operating system to the user rather than forcing the user to adapt to the operating system. Performance is another major reason Windows and macOS should be worried. Linux desktops are incredibly efficient, even on older or low-end hardware. A modern Linux system can feel fast and responsive on machines that struggle to run Windows 11 smoothly. This matters more than ever in a world where people are holding on to their devices longer due to rising costs. Linux gives aging laptops and desktops a second life, while Windows increasingly pushes hardware requirements that leave perfectly usable machines behind. macOS avoids this problem by controlling hardware, but that comes at the cost of extremely high prices and limited repairability. The software ecosystem on Linux has also improved beyond what many people realize. Flatpak, Snap, and AppImage have dramatically simplified application distribution. Installing software on Linux no longer means hunting through forums, compiling from source, or dealing with dependency hell. Many popular applications are now available directly from graphical app stores with one-click installation. Browsers, productivity tools, creative software, development environments, and even gaming platforms are readily accessible. While Linux may still lack some proprietary applications, the gap is shrinking every year, and in many cases open-source alternatives are more than good enough. Gaming, once Linux's biggest weakness, has become one of its most impressive success stories. Thanks to Valve's Proton and Steam Play, thousands of Windows-only games now run flawlessly on Linux, often with performance equal to or better than Windows. The rise of the Steam Deck has also played a huge role in legitimizing Linux as a gaming platform. When a major gaming company ships a Linux-based device to millions of users and it works beautifully, perceptions start to change. Gaming on Linux is no longer a novelty. It's a real viable option, and that's a huge psychological shift. Security and privacy are areas where Linux desktops quietly outshine their competitors. Linux users are not constantly bombarded with ads, telemetry, or forced online accounts just to use their own computer. Windows 11's increasing integration of advertising, tracking, and cloud dependency has frustrated many users. macOS, while more subtle, still tightly controls what users can do and collects significant data. Linux, by contrast, offers transparency. You can see what's running, what's installed, and what the system is doing. Updates don't reboot your system without warning, and you're not locked into a vendor's ecosystem. The update experience itself is another major win for Linux. System updates on Linux are generally faster, less disruptive, and more predictable. You can update your entire system, including the operating system and applications, from a single interface. No more endless reboots, forced restarts, or updates happening at the worst possible time. This may sound like a small detail, but over months and years of daily use, it makes a huge difference in how enjoyable an operating system feels. Another important factor is the rise of immutable and atomic Linux desktops like Fedora Silverblue, OpenSUSE MicroOS Desktop, and similar projects. These systems are designed to be extremely stable and resistant to breakage. Instead of constantly modifying the base system, updates are applied atomically, reducing the risk of system corruption. If something goes wrong, rolling back to a previous state is often trivial. This is the kind of reliability that enterprise environments love, but it's now making its way to everyday desktop users. Windows and macOS talk a lot about stability, but Linux is quietly redefining what stable actually means. The Linux desktop community is also innovating faster than ever. New desktop environments, display servers, and system components are constantly being improved. Wayland, for example, is steadily replacing the aging X11 system, bringing better security, smoother graphics, and improved support for modern hardware. While the transition hasn't been perfect, the progress is undeniable. Linux desktops are being built with the future in mind, not just maintaining legacy systems for the sake of compatibility. One of the most underestimated strengths of Linux desktops is choice. If you don't like how one distribution or desktop environment works, you can switch to another without changing your entire philosophy or ecosystem. Want something that looks and feels familiar to Windows? There are options for that. Prefer a macOS-like aesthetic? You can achieve that too. Want something entirely unique and keyboard-driven? Linux has you covered. This level of choice doesn't fragment the experience as much as critics claim. Instead, it empowers users to find what works best for them. Meanwhile, Windows and macOS are facing their own internal problems. Windows is struggling with identity. Is it a traditional desktop OS, a cloud service, an advertising platform, or all of the above? Frequent UI changes, inconsistent design language, and questionable decisions have left many users frustrated. macOS, while still polished, is increasingly tied to Apple's ecosystem and hardware strategy. It works best if you fully buy into Apple's world, and that world is expensive and restrictive. Linux stands in contrast as an open platform that doesn't require brand loyalty or constant upgrades. Another major shift is happening in education and developing markets. Linux is increasingly being used in schools, universities, and government projects around the world. As more people grow up using Linux-based systems, the idea that Linux is weird or too hard disappears. When those users enter the workforce or buy their own computers, they are more likely to consider Linux as a normal option. This long-term cultural change could have massive implications for the desktop market. Developers, content creators, and power users are also finding Linux desktops increasingly attractive. Tools for programming, containerization, virtualization, and DevOps are often better integrated and more performant on Linux. Creative workflows, once dominated by macOS, are expanding on Linux thanks to improving hardware support and open-source creative tools. While Linux may not replace macOS overnight in creative industries, the gap is closing faster than many expected. Perhaps the most important reason Windows and macOS should be scared is that Linux desktops are improving without aggressive marketing or massive advertising budgets. This growth is organic. It's driven by word of mouth, community enthusiasm, and genuine quality improvements. People switch to Linux not because they're forced to, but because they want to. That kind of adoption is powerful, and it's difficult to counter with marketing alone. Linux desktops are no longer trying to prove that they can exist. They're proving that they can excel. They offer freedom, performance, privacy, and customization in a way that proprietary operating systems simply can't match without compromising their business models. Windows relies on data, services, and vendor lock-in. macOS relies on hardware exclusivity and ecosystem control. Linux relies on openness and collaboration, and that approach is finally paying off. This doesn't mean Windows or macOS are about to disappear. They are deeply entrenched, and millions of users are perfectly happy with them. But the idea that Linux desktops are forever stuck in third place, barely usable and only for enthusiasts, is outdated. Linux has crossed a threshold. It is now a serious, compelling desktop platform that continues to improve at a rapid pace. As Linux desktops become more refined, more user-friendly, and more visible through devices like the Steam Deck and polished distributions, the question is no longer whether Linux can compete. The question is how long Windows and macOS can afford to ignore it. Because for the first time in a very long time, Linux desktops aren't just catching up. They're setting their own standards, and in many areas, they're already ahead.